Montana Territory, 1882. The dust from the approaching rider had been visible for nearly 15 minutes before Dawson Harker could make out the silhouette against the fading light. He squinted from the porch of his modest ranch house, one hand resting on the weathered wooden railing, the other adjusting the brim of his hat. Behind him, the sound of his children squabbling over dinner preparations filtered through the open door. "Mary Elizabeth, you set that table proper, or I'll have you mending socks all evening," he called over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off the approaching figure. "Pa, Tommy took the good knife again," his daughter's voice carried back. Dawson sighed. 3 years a widower with 3 children to raise alone had aged him beyond his 32 years. The ranch demanded everything he had, and the children, well, they needed more than he could give them. The rider drew closer, and Dawson could now see it was a woman. She sat tall in the saddle, her navy blue traveling dress arranged modestly over her mount. As she approached, she pulled her horse to a stop at the front of his property. "Mr. Harker," she called, her voice clear and confident. "That's me," he replied, stepping down from the porch. She dismounted with practiced ease, though Dawson noted the formality of her attire. This was no ranch woman, at least not by trade. "I'm Miss Nora O'Brien," she said, extending a gloved hand. "The new schoolteacher for Pine Creek." Recognition dawned on him. "Of course. The town council mentioned you'd be arriving." He took her hand briefly, noting the firmness of her grip. "Though I believe you've missed your mark by about 5 miles. Town's that way." He gestured eastward. A slight flush colored her cheeks. "Yes, well, I was given directions, but it seems the landmarks around here are rather subjective." A crash from inside the house followed by a wail interrupted them. "Pa," Tommy's voice carried outside. Dawson closed his eyes briefly. "Miss O'Brien, I apologize, but please," she interrupted, "don't let me keep you." He nodded gratefully and turned toward the house, then paused. "It'll be dark soon. Town's too far to make it safely. We've got a spare room if you'd care to stay the night. It's simple but clean." Her relief was evident. "That would be most appreciated, Mr. Harker." Inside, chaos reigned. 8-year-old Tommy stood over a shattered plate. 10-year-old Mary Elizabeth was attempting to salvage dinner from the iron stove where it threatened to burn, and 5-year-old Sarah sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face over some unknown offense. "I tried to do the potatoes like Ma used to," Mary Elizabeth explained, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. "But they're all stuck to the pan." Dawson removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Children," he said with forced calm, "we have a visitor. Miss O'Brien is the new schoolteacher in Pine Creek." 3 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the newcomer standing in the doorway. Nora, to her credit, didn't flinch at the scene before her. "Hello," she said warmly, removing her gloves. "It seems you could use an extra set of hands." Before Dawson could protest, she had swept into the kitchen, expertly rescued the potatoes, directed Tommy to sweep up the broken plate, and somehow, within minutes, had Sarah giggling instead of crying. Dinner that night was the first meal in months where Dawson didn't feel the weight of his inadequacy quite so heavily. Miss O'Brien carried the conversation, drawing out each child with questions about their interests, gently correcting their manners without making them feel small. Later, after the children were abed, Dawson sat across from her at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before each of them. "You have a way with them," he said. She smiled, her green eyes warm in the lamplight. "I've been teaching for 5 years, Mr. Harker. Children are my calling." "Dawson," he corrected. "Mr. Harker makes me sound like my father." "Dawson," she agreed. "And you may call me Nora." "How does a woman like you end up teaching in a place like Pine Creek?" he asked. There was something refined about her that suggested Eastern upbringing, perhaps even wealth. Her smile faltered slightly. "I wanted somewhere new, somewhere I could make a difference." He sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Everyone in the West had a past they'd rather not discuss. "Well, Pine Creek could use someone like you," he said instead. "Our last teacher lasted less than a season before the isolation got to her." "I'm not afraid of isolation," she said with quiet certainty. The next morning, Dawson rose before dawn as usual, but discovered Nora already in the kitchen, a fresh pot of coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "You didn't have to do this," he said, embarrassed by her industry. "I'm an early riser," she replied simply, "and it's the least I can do for your hospitality." He escorted her to town after breakfast, the children waving enthusiastically from the porch. As they rode, Dawson found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about the ranch, his late wife Caroline, the struggles of the past 3 years. The children need schooling, he admitted. Mary Elizabeth has a quick mind, and Tommy could be good with figures if anyone could keep his attention long enough. But the ranch is 3 hours ride round trip to town. I can't spare them that long each day, and I certainly can't escort them. Nora was quiet for a moment. Perhaps we could arrange something. Other ranching families must have the same difficulty. The Millers to the south have 4 school-aged children, he agreed. And the Petersons to the east have 2. What if, she said thoughtfully, I were to teach at a central location a few days a week, somewhere between the ranches? You do that? Ride out from town. For the children's education? Of course. By the time they reached Pine Creek, plans had been laid for Nora to teach at the old line cabin on the border of Dawson's and the Millers' properties 3 days a week. The town council, eager to accommodate anything that might keep the new teacher from leaving, readily agreed to the arrangement. The first day of lessons at the line cabin, 2 weeks later, saw 9 children from 3 families gathered in the freshly swept single room. Dawson had offered to ride out with his children, just to see them settled. They're a bit wild, he warned Nora as they approached. Not used to sitting still for learning. She smiled, undaunted. Leave them to me, Mr. Harker. To his amazement, by the time he returned to collect them that afternoon, all 9 children were seated attentively as Nora led them through a reading from McGuffey's Reader. Even Tommy, who couldn't usually focus long enough to saddle his own pony, was watching her with rapt attention. Pa! Sarah ran to him as soon as lessons were dismissed. Miss O'Brien says I'm a natural reader. She says I could be reading whole books by Christmas. Mary Elizabeth approached more sedately, but her eyes shone. She's teaching us about maps, Pa, real maps, not just directions. She showed us where Montana Territory is, and where Washington City is, and the ocean. Tommy was last, hands in his pockets, trying to appear nonchalant. She ain't bad, Pa. For a teacher. Nora approached, her cheeks flushed with the success of the day. They did wonderfully, she told him. You should be proud. And he realized, proud of his children, and grateful to this woman who had swept into their lives like a fresh breeze. The weeks passed, and Dawson found himself looking forward to lesson days with an eagerness that surprised him. Sometimes he would linger after dropping the children off, helping Nora prepare the classroom or repair something in the cabin. Other times, he would arrive early for pickup, watching through the window as she guided his children's minds with the same gentle firmness she had shown that first night at dinner. It was during one such moment, as he observed her kneeling beside Sarah, guiding the child's hand to form letters, that Dawson realized he was in danger of developing feelings for Miss O'Brien. The thought rattled him. He hadn't looked at a woman since Caroline died. Hadn't wanted to. But there was something about Nora, her quiet competence, her genuine care for his children, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. He backed away from the window, troubled. She was the children's teacher, nothing more. And a refined woman like her would hardly be interested in a widowed rancher with calloused hands and 3 unruly children. Nora, for her part, found herself thinking of the Harker family far more often than was professionally appropriate. The children had quickly claimed a special place in her heart. Mary Elizabeth with her determined self-sufficiency, Tommy with his barely concealed sensitive nature, and little Sarah with her boundless curiosity. And then there was Dawson. At first, she had seen only a struggling father, a man worn down by responsibility and grief. But as the weeks passed, she discovered more: his dry humor, his unwavering integrity, the tender way he listened to his children's daily reports, no matter how trivial. Miss O'Brien, Mary Elizabeth said one day after the other children had been dismissed, do you know how to make apple pie? I do, Nora replied, curious about the question. Ma used to make it for Pa's birthday, the girl explained. It's next week, and I wanted to surprise him, but I don't remember how she did it. Nora's heart squeezed at the child's earnest expression. Perhaps I could help you, she offered. If your father wouldn't mind me visiting your home again. Mary Elizabeth's face lit up. Oh, he wouldn't mind. He talks about you all the time. Does he? Nora asked, too quickly. She felt heat rising to her cheeks and busied herself straightening papers. He says you're a blessing. The girl continued artlessly. He says we're all doing better since you came. The following Tuesday, Nora arrived at the Harker ranch carrying a basket with apples and the necessary spices for pie making. She had told herself this was purely for the children's sake, a cooking lesson combined with a kind gesture for a hard-working father. But her racing pulse as she approached the house told a different story. Mary Elizabeth threw open the door before Nora could knock. "You came," she exclaimed. "Pa's out checking the north pasture with Tommy. They won't be back for hours." Perfect timing for their surprise, though Nora felt a stab of disappointment that Dawson wouldn't be there to welcome her. The next few hours passed in a flurry of flour, peeled apples, and laughter as Nora guided Mary Elizabeth through the process of making a pie crust while Sarah watched wide-eyed from her perch on a kitchen stool. "Ma would sing while she baked," Sarah said suddenly, her small face serious. "Do you know songs, Miss O'Brien?" "I know a few," Nora admitted, and began a gentle rendition of Beautiful Dreamer as she showed Mary Elizabeth how to crimp the edges of the crust. She was so absorbed in the task and the song that she didn't hear the front door open. It wasn't until she looked up and saw Dawson standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, that she realized he had returned. "Mr. Harker," she said, flustered. "The girls wanted to surprise you for your birthday. I hope you don't mind." "My birthday isn't until tomorrow," he said, his voice rough. "We wanted to practice." Sarah piped up. "So tomorrow's pie would be perfect." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. "Is that so? Miss O'Brien is teaching us just like Ma would have," Mary Elizabeth said proudly. Something flickered in Dawson's eyes, pain, gratitude, and something else Nora couldn't quite name. "That's mighty thoughtful," he said softly, his gaze holding Nora's. "All of you." The practice pie was delicious, despite a slightly burnt edge, and Nora found herself invited to stay for supper. The easy domesticity of the evening unsettled her. This wasn't why she had come to Montana Territory, to fall into another family, to risk her heart again. She had come to start fresh, to be independent, to leave behind the expectations and disappointments of her past. As she prepared to leave, Dawson walked her to her horse. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for today, for everything you've done for my children." "They're wonderful children," she replied. "You've done a remarkable job with them, considering their mother's gone and their father's in over his head." His tone was light, but she heard the underlying pain. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "You're a good father, Dawson." He looked away, adjusting the stirrup on her saddle though it needed no adjustment. "Not good enough. They deserve more than half-burned dinners and patched clothes, and a father who's too tired to listen to their prayers at night. They deserve to be loved," Nora said gently. "And they are. Anyone can see that." He met her eyes then, and the vulnerability there made her breath catch. "Will you come back tomorrow? For the real birthday celebration? The children would be disappointed if you didn't." "Just the children?" She wanted to ask, but didn't dare. "I'll come," she promised instead. That night, in her small room above the general store in Pine Creek, Nora wrote a letter to her sister back in Boston. "I fear I've made a terrible mistake," she wrote. "Not in coming here. That was the right decision, despite what Father says. But in allowing myself to become attached. You know why I left. You know what William did. How he made me believe in a future that never existed. I swore I wouldn't be that foolish again. But there is a family here, 3 children who need mothering, and their father." She stopped, pen hovering over the paper. What could she say about Dawson? That she admired his quiet strength? That she found herself watching for the rare moments when he truly smiled? That sometimes, when their hands accidentally brushed as he helped her down from her horse, she felt more alive than she had in years? She crumpled the letter and tossed it aside. Some things were better left unwritten. Dawson's birthday celebration was a simple affair. The promised apple pie, a new shirt the girls had secretly been sewing with guidance from Mrs. Miller, and a hand-carved wooden horse from Tommy that showed surprising skill. "I've been watching Hank Redfoot when he makes things," the boy explained, referring to the half-crow man who occasionally worked at the ranch. "He showed me how to use the knife proper." Dawson examined the carving with genuine appreciation. "This is fine work, son. Real fine." The pride on Tommy's face was worth more than gold to Nora. She had seen how the boy struggled with books, but came alive when working with his hands. If only all learning could be so tailored to a child's natural gifts. After the children were in bed, Dawson invited Nora to sit on the porch. The October air had a bite to it, and he gallantly draped a blanket around her shoulders as they settled into the rough-hewn chairs. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence, "about what you said about Tommy. How he learns different than the girls." "He's more practical," Nora agreed. "He needs to see the purpose in learning something." "That's just it. The ranch books need keeping. I've been doing it, but not well. If he could see that numbers have a real use." "You want me to teach him bookkeeping?" Nora asked, intrigued by the idea. "If you think he could learn it," Dawson said. "I'd pay extra, of course." "It's not about money," she said quickly. "I'd be happy to try. Perhaps Saturday afternoons? I could come here, since the books are here." And just like that, Nora found herself with another reason to visit the Harker ranch regularly. Each Saturday, she worked with Tommy on the practical mathematics of ranching, calculating feed requirements, tracking cattle counts, figuring costs and profits. To her delight, the boy who couldn't sit still for reading lessons would happily spend an hour working through the ranch ledgers. "He takes after his grandfather," Dawson told her one Saturday in late November as they watched Tommy meticulously copying figures into the leather-bound book. "My father could calculate faster in his head than most men with paper and pencil." "He's very bright," Nora agreed. "Just not in the way schools traditionally measure." Dawson studied her profile. "You see people," he said. "Really see them. It's a gift." She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I try to," she said softly. A moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then Sarah burst into the room, breaking the spell. "Miss O'Brien, it's snowing. Real snow, not just flurries." Indeed, the first substantial snowfall of the season had begun, blanketing the ranch in white. Nora moved to the window, watching the thick flakes swirl down. "I should leave soon," she said reluctantly, "before the paths become difficult." Dawson joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "It's coming down hard already," he observed. "Might be safer to wait it out." The snow didn't abate. By evening, it was clear that Nora wouldn't be returning to town that night. An impromptu celebration ensued, with the children delighted by the unexpected extension of their teacher's visit. They popped corn over the fire, told stories, and even convinced Dawson to bring out his rarely played harmonica. "Pa used to play for Ma all the time," Mary Elizabeth whispered to Nora as Dawson somewhat self-consciously began a rendition of Shenandoah. "He hasn't played since she died," Tommy added. "Not once." The simple tune, played with more feeling than technical skill, brought unexpected tears to Nora's eyes. She understood suddenly that she was being given a privilege, witnessing this man reclaiming a piece of himself that grief had buried. That night, lying in Caroline Harker's old bed, surrounded by the faint scent of lavender that Mary Elizabeth had proudly explained she placed in the dresser drawers, just like Ma did, Nora faced an uncomfortable truth. She was falling in love with not just Dawson, but his entire family. The realization terrified her. She had come west to escape the pain of betrayal, not to risk her heart again. But as the winter deepened and her visits to the ranch became more frequent, sometimes for Tommy's lessons, sometimes at the children's eager invitation for Sunday dinner, sometimes because Dawson himself asked her to look at a book he'd ordered for the children or to give her opinion on Mary Elizabeth's sewing progress, Nora found it increasingly difficult to maintain her professional distance. The children had completely claimed her heart, and Dawson, whenever their hands accidentally touched, or he helped her onto her horse, or she caught him watching her with that intent expression that made her breath catch, she felt the walls she had carefully built around her heart crumbling. For Dawson, the transformation of his home over the past months seemed nothing short of miraculous. The house that had felt hollow and cold after Caroline's death now rang with laughter again. His children were thriving under Nora's gentle guidance. Mary Elizabeth was less solemn, more willing to be the child she still was. Tommy's restless energy had found purpose in his new responsibilities with the ranch books. And Sarah, his baby girl who had barely known her mother, was blossoming with the female attention she craved. And Nora herself. Dawson found himself watching her, noticing things he had no business noticing. The way she tucked a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The slight dimple that appeared in her right cheek when she truly smiled. The graceful movement of her hands as she demonstrated something to the children. He told himself it was gratitude he felt, appreciation for what she'd done for his family. But in the quiet moments, when the children were abed and they sat together by the fire discussing books or local news or the children's progress, he knew it was more. The first real complication arrived in the form of Theodore Grant, the new manager of the bank in Pine Creek. Grant was everything Dawson was not: cultured, educated, well-dressed, and clearly interested in the town's schoolteacher. He's asked me to accompany him to the Christmas social, Nora mentioned casually one Saturday in early December as she reviewed Tommy's work. Dawson felt as though he'd been kicked by a horse. Grant, the banker? He managed to ask, keeping his tone neutral with effort. Yes, she replied, not meeting his eyes. He seems nice. Very nice, Dawson agreed hollowly. Well-spoken man. Good position. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by Tommy's pencil scratching on paper. Will you be attending the social? Nora asked after a moment. With the children, I mean. The annual Christmas social was the biggest event in Pine Creek, with families coming from miles around for food, dancing, and community celebration. We usually do, he said. The children look forward to it. Then perhaps I'll see you there, she said, her voice overly bright. That evening, after Nora had left and the children were in bed, Dawson sat alone by the dying fire, a wave of foolishness washing over him. What had he been thinking? That a woman like Nora O'Brien, educated, refined, beautiful, would be interested in a rough-hewn rancher with 3 children and a mountain of responsibilities? Of course she would be drawn to someone like Grant, someone who could offer her the kind of life she deserved. He had no claim on her, no right to feel this crushing disappointment. She was his children's teacher, a friend to his family. Nothing more. But as he banked the fire for the night, he couldn't ignore the hollow feeling in his chest or the unwelcome realization that somewhere along the way, Miss Nora O'Brien had become essential to his happiness. The night of the Christmas social arrived with perfect winter weather, cold enough for the snow to remain pristine, but not so bitter that travel was difficult. Dawson spent more time than usual on his appearance, trimming his beard neatly and donning his best shirt beneath his Sunday suit. You look handsome, Pa, Mary Elizabeth said approvingly as she helped Sarah with her hair ribbons. Like in that picture of you and Ma on your wedding day. Her innocent comment made him pause. Was that what he was doing? Preparing as if this were a courtship? He pushed the thought aside and focused on getting his family to town. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion, with pine boughs and red ribbons decorating the walls and tables laden with food contributed by every family in the area. A small group of local musicians provided lively tunes in one corner, and children darted between adults in excited groups. Dawson spotted Nora immediately. She wore a deep green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than he had ever seen it. She was standing near the punch bowl, laughing at something Theodore Grant was saying. Miss O'Brien. Sarah broke away from Dawson's side and ran toward her teacher, propriety forgotten in her excitement. Nora turned, her face lighting up at the sight of the child. Sarah, don't you look lovely in your red dress? Sarah preened under the attention, twirling to show off the dress that Mary Elizabeth had helped alter from an old one of their mothers. Hello, Dawson, Nora said, looking past Sarah to where he stood with the older children. Mary Elizabeth, Tommy. Merry Christmas. Miss O'Brien. Dawson tipped his hat, acutely aware of Grant's assessing gaze. Harker, Grant nodded. Good to see you in town. How's that loan payment coming along? The question, asked with a smile but pointed nonetheless, reminded Dawson of the gulf between them. The loan he had taken out after Caroline's death to keep the ranch afloat was a constant worry, especially with beef prices dropping. On schedule, he replied shortly. Good, good, Grant said, his tone suggesting mild surprise. Well, Nora has promised me the first dance, so if you'll excuse us. Dawson watched as Grant led Nora onto the makeshift dance floor. They made a handsome couple, he had to admit. Both tall and graceful, both clearly comfortable in social situations that always made Dawson feel awkward and oversized. Throughout the evening, he tried to focus on his children's enjoyment, helping Sarah get food, watching proudly as Mary Elizabeth was invited to dance by the Peterson boy, even managing a smile when Tommy was caught trying to spike the punch with Mr. Johansson's flask. But his eyes kept returning to Nora. She danced several times with Grant, but also with other men in the community, always with a polite smile and perfect composure. Not once did she lack for a partner. Why don't you ask her to dance, Pa? Mary Elizabeth appeared at his side during a lively reel. Who? He asked, though he knew perfectly well who his daughter meant. Mary Elizabeth gave him a look that was far too knowing for her 10 years. Miss O'Brien, of course. You've been watching her all night. That wouldn't be appropriate, he said automatically. She's your teacher. Mrs. Peterson says Miss O'Brien won't be teaching forever, his daughter continued. She says a pretty woman like that will be married by spring. The thought sent a spike of something like panic through him. Married by spring. To Grant, most likely. Living in town, perhaps even leaving Pine Creek eventually for some larger community more suited to a banker's ambitions. If that's what she wants, he said carefully, then I'd be happy for her. Mary Elizabeth gave him a disgusted look. You're being silly, Pa. She likes us. I can tell. And I think she likes you especially. Before he could respond to this startling assessment, the music changed to a slower waltz. This is your chance, his daughter urged. Even you can dance a waltz. Perhaps it was the festive atmosphere, or the nudging of his too perceptive daughter, or simply the fact that Nora looked so lovely in the lamplight. But Dawson found himself moving across the room toward her before he could talk himself out of it. Miss O'Brien, he said, stopping before her. Would you do me the honor? Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, certainly, but also what looked like pleasure. I'd be delighted, Mr. Harker. He was achingly aware of his rough hands as he took her delicate one in his, placing his other hand properly at her waist. They moved into the dance, and Dawson silently thanked Caroline for insisting he learn the waltz properly during their courtship. You dance very well, Nora said, looking up at him with a slight smile. You've been holding out on us, Mr. Harker. Dawson, he reminded her. And it's been a long while since I've had occasion to dance. Too long, she said softly. They moved together in perfect harmony, and Dawson was suddenly, intensely grateful for this moment, holding this woman in his arms, even in this most proper and public of ways. The children are having a wonderful time, she said after a moment. Sarah hasn't stopped smiling all evening. They've been looking forward to this for weeks, he replied, especially since you mentioned you'd be here. Her cheeks colored slightly. They're dear children. They adore you, he said simply. Then, gathering his courage, we all do. Her step faltered slightly, and he steadied her with a hand at her waist. Dawson, I shouldn't have said that, he interrupted, regretting his boldness. Forgive me. I have no right. No, she said quickly. It's not that. It's just. But whatever she might have said was interrupted as the music ended and Theodore Grant appeared at her elbow. They're serving the Christmas pudding, Grant announced. I've saved us places at the head table, Nora. Dawson released her immediately, stepping back. Thank you for the dance, Miss O'Brien. She looked between the two men, a conflict visible on her face that Dawson couldn't interpret. Thank you, she said finally, allowing Grant to lead her away. Dawson watched her go, the brief connection they had shared during the dance evaporating like morning mist. What had he been thinking? A woman like Nora had options, prospects. Men like Grant who could offer her a comfortable life, social standing. None of the hardships that came with ranching. He gathered his children earlier than they would have liked, citing the long ride home and the lateness of the hour. As they prepared to leave, he saw Nora watching them from across the room. He nodded politely in her direction, but didn't approach her again. The ride home was quiet, the children too tired for their usual chatter. Mary Elizabeth rode beside him, occasionally casting concerned glances his way. She danced with you the longest, she finally said. I was watching. Dawson sighed. It was just a dance, Mary Elizabeth. Nothing more. His daughter was quiet for a moment. Pa, when are you going to stop being afraid? The question, so direct and unexpected, caught him off guard. Afraid? What do you mean? Afraid of caring about someone again, she said with the terrible clarity of a child. Afraid they might leave like Ma did. Dawson reined his horse to a stop, turning to look at his daughter in the moonlight. Mary Elizabeth Harker, where did you get such an idea? She met his gaze steadily. I heard you. Last spring, talking to Uncle James. You said you'd never put yourself through that again. Never love someone who could be taken away. He remembered the conversation with his brother-in-law, never imagining his daughter had overheard. I was still grieving. But it's been 3 years, Pa, she said. And Miss O'Brien makes you smile. She makes all of us smile. Out of the mouths of babes, Dawson thought ruefully. When had his little girl become so perceptive? It's complicated, sweetheart, he said finally. Miss O'Brien has her own life, her own choices to make. And Mr. Grant seems to be courting her properly. Did you ever think maybe she's waiting for you to do the same? Mary Elizabeth asked. The question haunted him for days afterward. Was his daughter right? Had Nora been waiting for some sign from him? The way she had looked at him during their dance suggested. But no. He was reading too much into a simple moment of connection. The first real blizzard of the season hit 2 days after Christmas, confining the Harkers to their ranch for nearly a week. By the time the weather cleared enough for travel, it was New Year's Eve, and Dawson realized with a jolt that he hadn't seen or spoken to Nora since the Christmas social. Can we go to town, Pa? Tommy asked at breakfast. I want to show Miss O'Brien how I've been practicing my figures. And I finished my sampler, Sarah added. The one she helped me start. Dawson hesitated. Part of him wanted nothing more than to see Nora again. But another part, the cautious part that had protected his heart since Caroline's death, warned against it. What if Mary Elizabeth was wrong? What if Nora had spent the holidays being properly courted by Theodore Grant? The roads will still be bad, he hedged. Please, Pa. Sarah's pleading eyes were difficult to resist. We could bring her a New Year's gift, Mary Elizabeth suggested, to thank her for all she's done for us. And so, against his better judgment, Dawson found himself leading his children into Pine Creek that afternoon. The town was quiet, with many families still snowbound on outlying homesteads. They found Nora at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for the new term. She looked up in surprise as they entered, her face lighting up in a way that made Dawson's heart stutter. What a wonderful surprise, she exclaimed, setting aside her papers. I've missed you all terribly. The children surged forward with their small offerings, Tommy with his practice ledgers, Sarah with her completed sampler, Mary Elizabeth with a jar of preserved peaches she had put up in the summer. We wanted to wish you a happy new year, Dawson said, hanging back a bit. And thank you for everything you've done for the children. That's very kind, Nora said, accepting their gifts with genuine pleasure. I was just thinking how quiet the holidays have been without my regular visits to your ranch. Mr. Grant hasn't been keeping you company? The question slipped out before Dawson could stop it. A strange expression crossed Nora's face. Mr. Grant left for Helena the day after Christmas, she said carefully. He's been offered a position at a larger bank there. And you didn't go with him? Dawson asked, aware of the children watching this exchange with undisguised interest. Why would I? Nora seemed genuinely puzzled. My work is here. Hope, unbidden and dangerous, flared in Dawson's chest. We thought, at the social, you seemed close. Understanding dawned on her face, followed by something that looked remarkably like amusement. Mr. Grant was very attentive, she acknowledged. But I never encouraged his attentions beyond friendship. Oh, Dawson felt suddenly foolish, standing there with his hat in his hands like a tongue-tied schoolboy. A small smile played at the corners of Nora's mouth. Was there a reason you needed to know about my relationship with Mr. Grant, Mr. Harker? He was acutely aware of his children's rapt attention. Perhaps we could discuss this, privately? Nora nodded, turning to the children. Would you three mind very much checking on Mrs. Henderson at the general store? She mentioned having some penny candy she couldn't seem to sell. This transparent ruse was nonetheless effective, and within moments, the adults found themselves alone in the schoolhouse. Dawson, Nora said, dropping the formality. What is it you want to ask me? He took a deep breath. At the social, when we danced, I said something. That we all adore you. I remember, she said softly. I meant it, he continued, forcing himself to meet her eyes. But not just in the way it sounded. Not just gratitude or appreciation for what you've done for my children. Her expression was unreadable. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, Nora. More than I thought I could care for anyone again after Caroline. And it terrifies me, because I've already lost one woman I loved, and the thought of risking that again. Dawson, she interrupted, stepping closer to him. I came to Montana to escape my past, to be independent, to never again trust a man with my heart. His own heart sank at her words. I understand. No, you don't, she said, a smile breaking through. I had a perfectly sensible plan. And then I met you and your children, and suddenly all my careful plans seemed less important than the way I feel when I'm with your family. When I'm with you. And how do you feel? He asked, hardly daring to hope. Like I found something I wasn't even looking for, she admitted. A home. Not just a place to live, but people who matter to me, who I want to build a life with. Dawson reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. The ranch isn't much. We struggle sometimes. And 3 children is a lot to take on. 3 wonderful children, she corrected, who I already love as if they were my own. And their father? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Their father, she said, stepping even closer, is the most honorable, hard-working, loving man I've ever known. And if you were to ask me a certain question, I believe my answer would be yes. Joy, pure and powerful, surged through him. Nora O'Brien, he said formally, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of being a mother to my children and a partner in all things? Yes, she said simply. With all my heart, yes. He pulled her into his arms then, propriety forgotten as he kissed her with all the feeling he had kept contained for months. She returned his kiss with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck. They broke apart at the sound of cheering from the doorway. The children stood there, grinning widely, penny candy forgotten in the excitement of witnessing this moment. Does this mean Miss O'Brien is going to be our new ma? Sarah asked hopefully. Nora looked to Dawson, her eyes shining with unshed tears. If that's what you'd like, she said to the children. We've been hoping for this forever, Mary Elizabeth declared with the drama of a 10-year-old. Haven't we, Tommy? Tommy shrugged, aiming for nonchalance, but his wide smile gave him away. I guess it'll be okay, long as you still help me with the books. I'll help you with anything you need, Nora promised. All of you. Dawson pulled her close again, his family, his complete family, gathering around them. Happy New Year, he whispered against her hair. The first of many, she replied. They were married in the spring of 1883, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the promise of new life was everywhere. The ceremony took place at the Harker Ranch, with the children standing up with them as attendants, and the entire community gathered to witness the union of the rancher and the schoolteacher. Nora wore a simple ivory dress, her hair adorned with wildflowers that Sarah had insisted on weaving into a crown. Dawson, standing beside his brother-in-law James, who had journeyed from Colorado for the occasion, watched her approach with a sense of wonder that this extraordinary woman had chosen him, chosen his family. The reception afterward was a joyous affair, with tables set up in the yard and music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As twilight fell, Dawson found a moment alone with his new wife on the porch of what was now their home. Happy, Mrs. Harker? He asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his side. Though I'm not sure who's more excited, me or the children. They adore you, he said, echoing words he had spoken months ago at the Christmas social. We all do. And I adore all of you, she replied. My family. From inside came the sounds of laughter and music, the community celebrating with them. But for this moment, they stood apart, watching the first stars appear over the Montana landscape that had brought them together. I never expected this, Nora admitted. When I came west, I was running away from heartbreak. I never imagined I'd find such joy. And I never thought I'd love again, Dawson said. You've given us, a second chance at happiness. Not a second chance, she corrected gently. A new beginning. He kissed her then, under the vast Montana sky, as somewhere in the house a child called for Ma, and was answered by Mary Elizabeth's patient voice saying, Give them a minute. They broke apart, laughing. Parenthood called, as it always would. Shall we? Dawson offered his arm. Lead the way, Mr. Harker, Nora replied, taking it. We have a family waiting. And together, they stepped back into the warmth of the house that had once been hollow with loss, but now overflowed with love, ready to begin the next chapter of their story, not as schoolteacher and struggling rancher, but as husband and wife, partners in whatever life might bring.